Did you know that there are such powerful Buddhist teachings, which for centuries were hidden even within the temples themselves, principles that do not appear in popular books, but which, when revealed, completely change the way you see life, your mind, and yourself? Get ready to access what was reserved only for the initiated, but be careful. Once you see it, you can't unsee it anymore. Sign up now and ring the bell, because each new principle revealed is a part of you that awakens. And as the ancient masters said, when the disciple is ready, the teaching reveals itself. Maybe this video will be your moment. 1. The Code of Stillness. Unlock the silent force that transforms chaos into clarity. At some point in your life, have you ever felt like disappearing just for a few minutes? Disappear from the noise, the rush, the demands that don't stop. The truth is that the outside world will never be silent for you. But there is a place where all this stops, and it is within you. This is where your true strength lies. Not the one that screams, that fights, that resists, but the one that observes, breathes, welcomes. True clarity comes from silence, not haste. Just as a glass of cloudy water only becomes clear when you let the residue settle, your mind needs a break to reveal what matters. Have you noticed how the best decisions are not born in chaos? They arise in the interval between two thoughts. In the calm after crying, in the silence after the scream. There is power in not responding immediately, in not allowing yourself to be swallowed by the urgency. I remember a story about a monk who, when insulted by a man on the street, just smiled and went on his way. Someone asked, "Why didn't you respond?" He said, "If someone gives you a gift and you don't accept it, who does it belong to?" That is the power of stillness. It's not passivity, it is wisdom in action. In practice, applying the Code of Stillness may be simple, but it is not easy. It's stopping for 60 seconds before getting into an argument. It's taking a deep breath before making an important decision. It's turning off your cell phone for an hour and simply listening to the sound of your own presence. You don't need a temple in the Himalayas to experience this. It needs intention. You need to choose not to get lost in every notification, every anxious thought, every internal charge. Silence is an invitation, but it only accepts those who are willing to truly listen. Transformation begins when you realize that not every thought needs attention, not every emotion needs a response. You are not anger, nor fear, nor haste. You are the one who observes, that feels but doesn't drown, who listens but doesn't get lost. And it is in this internal space, free from the noise of the world, that your real freedom lives. The chaos outside may continue, but if there is peace inside, nothing dominates you anymore. Principle 2. The Mirror of the Mind. How to see your true self beyond the illusion. Have you ever looked in the mirror and had the strange feeling that what you see isn't exactly you? The face, the features, the expressions, everything there seems real but at the same time incomplete. The physical mirror shows the surface, but there is another mirror, invisible, that reflects who you are inside. Your thoughts, emotions, fears, and desires. This is the mirror of the mind, and unlike glass, it can be distorted. Everything you believe about yourself, "I'm not good enough, I always fail, no one understands me," are scratches on the surface, illusions that prevent you from seeing your essence. The mind is not an enemy, but it can be a skilled illusionist. She repeats old stories, relives old pains, invents futures that never happened, and the more you believe in these projections, the further you move from the truth. Buddhist practice invites us to look at the mind as a calm lake. If it is agitated, the reflected images will be distorted, but when the water calms down, the true picture appears. That's how it works with your identity. Calm reveals, excess hides, and what is hidden is precisely who you came to be. I remember a woman who for years carried the belief that she was unworthy of love. The origin? An absent father, an unresolved abandonment. Every time someone got close, she sabotaged it. The mind said, "They will leave you again." Until one day she wrote that sentence on a piece of paper and stared at it for minutes. He cried, breathed, laughed. She realized that that voice wasn't hers. It was an old, inherited shadow. This is the moment when the mirror starts to clear, when you question instead of obey, when you observe the thought instead of being controlled by it. Really seeing yourself requires courage. Courage to look at the parts you hide. For the traumas you hide with smiles, but it is in this encounter that liberation is born. The mirror of the mind can be your greatest ally if you learn to clean it with presence, compassion, and truth. You are not the voices that judge you, nor the memories that paralyze you. You are the consciousness that perceives all of this, and the brighter the reflection, the stronger its light in the world. The Buddha taught, everything we are is the result of what we think. The mind is everything. We become what we think. This isn't just a metaphor, it's a radical reminder that the reality you experience begins within. The mirror of the mind reflects your deepest beliefs, your unresolved pains, your unquestioned stories, but it can also be cleaned. It can be polished with presence, courage, and compassion. Every time you question an automatic thought, you are seeing beyond the reflection. You are beginning to see with the eyes of consciousness. It is said that a young monk went to the master and said, "Master, I see so many defects in myself. Now how can I purify myself?" The master took him to a cloudy lake and said, "Try to see your face." The disciple bent down but couldn't. The water was choppy, full of mud. The master then asked him to wait. They sat for hours, without wind, without movement. The mud settled, until at dusk, the lake calmed down. "Now look." The young man saw his face clearly. The master concluded, "Your mind is this lake. You don't need to fight with the mud, you just need to be still, and then you will see the truth." 3. The path of non-attachment, the secret to unshakable inner peace. Most of our suffering comes from one simple act, grasping. We hold on to ideas, people, expectations, things, as if they were extensions of who we are. But everything you hold tight will one day slip away. Impermanence does not ask for permission. And the more you try to control, the more you despair when everything changes. Because everything changes. Detachment is not coldness, it's freedom. It's not stopping loving, it's loving without holding back. It's understanding that nothing nor anyone belongs to you, and yet choosing to care, value, be present. Think of a handful of sand. If you close your hand tightly, it escapes through your fingers. But if you open your hand and just hold it lightly, it stays. This is how relationships, dreams, phases of life are. Attachments create tension. Detachment, on the contrary, is internal relaxation. It's trusting that what's true will stay, and what's not will make room for something better. I remember a young man who lost his dream job. He collapsed. But months later, he found a hidden passion for music, something he never would have explored if he hadn't been forced to unleash it. Attachment creates illusions of control. We believe we can keep everything exactly as we want, but all it takes is one connection, one loss, one unexpected change, and everything falls apart. The practice of non-attachment is living with an open heart but loose fingers. It's savoring the now without trying to freeze it. This does not mean being indifferent. It means being whole, even when the one you love leaves. It's crying if you need to, yes, but without destroying yourself. It's allowing life to move without it destroying your peace. Letting go is not weakness. It is a profound act of trust. Trust that life knows, that you can start over, that you are greater than what you lost. When you practice detachment, you become light. You no longer carry unnecessary weights. Your relationships become more genuine, your most conscious choices, and your heart finally rests. Because he understands that nothing is permanent, but everything can be experienced with presence, love, and gratitude. Buddhist master Ajahn Chah said, "If you hold something too tightly, you will suffer. If you open your hand, you will find that you are already free." Life is constantly changing. The more we try to imprison what we love, the more we become prisoners. Detachment is not an invitation to abandonment. It is an invitation to love without possession, to surrender without imprisonment, to presence without control. When you accept that everything is impermanent, you learn to honor each moment as it exists, without trying to freeze it. A story goes that an old monk lived with a small clay cup. He took care of it with affection, but he always said, "This cup is already broken." A confused disciple asked, "But master, she's perfect." The old man smiled and replied, "Precisely because I know that she will break one day, I value her. Every sip of tea every morning by her side becomes precious. I don't suffer when she's gone because I never possessed her. I just lived her." Days later, the cup fell. It broke. And the master, with a serene smile, continued his tea. With empty hands and a full heart. Principle 4. The Flame of Impermanence. Burn away suffering by embracing constant change. From a young age, we are taught to seek security. We want things to last. Love, success, youth, certainty. But the world doesn't work like that. Everything that is born, one day, dies. Everything that begins, at some point, ends. This truth is scary, and that's why we often try to ignore it. But at the heart of Buddhism, there is a principle that burns away this illusion. Impermanence. Nothing is fixed. Nothing remains untouched. And as painful as it may seem, it is liberating. Because if everything changes, then even the pain goes away. Even sadness dissolves. Even fear finds an end. Look around. The seasons change. The sky is never the same 2 days in a row, neither do you. That person you were 5 years ago no longer exists. And it's okay. Suffering arises when you try to stop the river of life with your hands. But life was not meant to be stopped. It was meant to be lived, moment by moment. When you accept impermanence, you begin to see beauty even in what ends. A sunset is beautiful precisely because it lasts for a short time. A tight hug becomes sacred because you don't know when it will be the last one. I remember a man who took care of his wife with Alzheimer's. He knew that every day she forgot a little more about him. Instead of rebelling, he started writing love notes, even though he knew she wouldn't remember. When someone asked why, he said, "She might not remember who I am, but I remember who she was to me." This is the wisdom of those who understand impermanence and choose to love anyway. Not because it will last, but because it is worth living. This love is free. It does not depend on the guarantee of eternity. Applying the flame of impermanence in real life is accepting changes without blind resistance. Lost a job? A cycle has closed. Ended a relationship? Your version no longer fits there. Suffering is natural, but insisting on holding something that has already left is optional suffering. Letting go comes easier when we understand that the nature of life is flow, not control. All the pain you feel now was once joy. And all the joy you feel today will one day be a memory. That's not sad. It's sacred. That's what makes it all so real. People who live with this awareness don't chase time. They dance with it. They enjoy it intensely because they know that now is all they have. It changes the way you look someone in the eye. How do you say goodbye? How you value a silence, a laugh, even a mistake. You understand that each moment is unique and therefore infinite. Impermanence destroys what is superficial, but reveals what is eternal within you. That which watches everything change, but remains present, attentive, awake. The flame of impermanence burns attachment, but illuminates truth. It doesn't take away what's truly yours. It only dissolves what was an illusion. You don't control time, but you can decide what to do with it. Living conscious of impermanence is living awake. It's being grateful for what once was, honoring what still is, and letting go of what no longer fits. When you accept change as part of the dance of existence, fear loses strength, and in its place, something new is born. Freedom. Principle 5. The Power of the Void. Discover how nothing has infinite potential. The word empty is scary. It sounds like absence, loss, loneliness, but at the heart of Buddhism, emptiness is anything but that. Emptiness is not the end, it is the beginning. It is the space where everything can be born, grow, transform. Think of a blank canvas. There, any image is possible. Or in an empty cup. It is because it is empty that it can be filled. The mind, in the same way, needs space for new understandings to emerge. A mind full of certainties, judgments, and noise has no room for anything new. The power of emptiness is the power of openness. We often resist emptiness because it forces us to face what's behind the distraction. No noise, no people, no plans. What's left? Us. And that for many is scary, but it is in this encounter with silence itself that true wisdom emerges. A master once said, "The cup full of mud needs to be left to sit so that the mud settles." The same is true with the mind. Emptiness is this necessary rest. It's when you stop trying to fill every second that something bigger can reveal itself. How many times have you felt lost, like you've been emptied inside? An ending, a loss, a sudden change. It feels like the end, but it could be a new beginning. A soil needs to be cleaned before planting new seeds. The void is this prepared ground. I remember a young woman who, after years in an abusive marriage, left in fear that she would never find love again. But in the silence of that solitude, she rediscovered her own voice. You learned to like yourself, and it was in that inner space that something new blossomed. Not for someone else, but for herself. In practical life, this means stopping trying to control everything. Let the pause exist. Allow yourself not to know. Go unanswered for a while, staying silent in a world that pushes you into the noise. Don't fill every moment with social networks, notifications, tasks. There is immense value in simply being. It is in the space between one thought and another that the mind breathes. It is in the interval between two sounds that we hear the echo of what matters. Emptiness is not absence. It is pure presence. No distraction, no defense, no noise. The ego hates emptiness because it cannot hide there. It is in the void that masks, social roles, illusions fall. But it's also where you find something deeper, consciousness. That part of you that has always been there, but can only be felt when everything else is silent. When you learn to value emptiness, your search changes. You stop chasing things to feel complete, because you realize you are already whole. It was just buried by excess. Embracing the void is like opening the window of a room that has been closed for years. At first, the light is uncomfortable. Dust flies. But then, the air comes in. The freshness, the clarity. The void cleanses, heals, reveals. It returns you home to the essence. So when you feel like everything is gone, don't panic. Breathe, feel, and remember, what seems like nothing may be exactly what was missing. It is there, in the deep silence of emptiness, that true plenitude is born. 6. The Karma Reset Key. End negative cycles and create conscious results. Karma is not punishment. It is not an automatic law of return that punishes you when you make a mistake. Karma is cause and effect. It is a seed that, once planted, sooner or later blossoms. Your actions and even your intentions leave marks on the invisible field of life. But here's the secret. Karma is not destiny. It can be transformed. There is a key, a turning point capable of interrupting repetitive patterns, and this key is called consciousness. When you act without conscience, you repeat. When you act with presence, you reset, and that changes everything. Think about the situations that seem to repeat themselves in your life, relationships that end the same way, choices that bring the same kind of pain, opportunities that narrowly escape you. This is not bad luck, it's standard. And patterns only break when you ask yourself, what in me is still acting on automatic? Most people live reacting, not choosing. But karma rewrites itself the moment you realize the reaction and choose something different. It's not always easy, but it's possible. And every small conscious choice already changes your path. I remember a man who was always involved with people who betrayed him. He said, "I am cursed." But when he looked deeper, he realized that he grew up being told that true love doesn't exist. Without realizing it, he was attracted to self-destructive relationships, like a prophecy being fulfilled. Realizing this, he decided to stop. He went to therapy. He chose to stay alone for a while. When he found himself again, he attracted someone who treated him with the same respect he finally gave himself. This is the reset. It's not magic. It's clarity that transforms action. Applying the karma key is looking at your decisions with more presence. It's realizing when an emotion is leading you to repeat something old. It's stopping before you explode, before you run away, before you give in to fear. It's choosing, with courage, a new behavior, even if small. Apologize where you used to blame yourself. Hear where people used to scream. Leave where you once begged to stay. Each gesture like this creates a new path towards your destination, and you realize you are not stuck with what was. You are free to create what you can be. But it's important to remember, breaking a cycle takes time. Sometimes you will fall again. You will repeat it even if you are conscious. And it's okay. The reset is not perfection, it's intention. It's for you to rise up with more wisdom, with more compassion. Karma is not a sentence, as it is an opportunity to awaken. And every day, every choice, every moment of presence is a chance to plant new seeds, more aligned with who you want to become. True freedom happens when you understand that you don't need to carry past mistakes as your identity. You are not what they did to you. It's not what you repeated without knowing it. You are what you decide now to do with all of this. Karma transforms when you transform, and with each conscious choice, life responds differently, like an echo that changes tone as the voice changes. The question is, what sound are you making to the universe today? Principle 7. The breath of awakening. Harness the hidden energy in each inhalation. Breathing is the first act of life, and yet it's what we forget most. It happens alone, silent, constant. But what few know is that breathing carries a hidden power, a direct bridge between body, mind, and spirit. In Buddhism, it is not just a biological function. It's an access key. When you breathe with presence, you access deeper layers of your being. You ground yourself in the now, and now is the only place where life happens. All healing, all clarity, all transformation begins with one simple thing. Breathe in, exhale. Think about how you breathe when you're anxious. Fast, short, breathless. And when you are at peace, deep, slow, fluid. Breathing reflects your internal state, but the opposite is also true. Changing the breath changes the state. It's like having an invisible controller in your hands. I remember a woman who suffered intense panic attacks. No medicine seemed to work, until she learned a simple practice. Stop and breathe for 4 seconds, hold for 4, release for 4. They called it the calm box. Within weeks, she regained control over herself, not by thought, but by breath. In spiritual practice, breathing is the starting point of meditation, but you don't need pillows, incense, or temples. Just sit, close your eyes, and watch. 1 minute of conscious breathing can change the tone of your day. It can avoid an argument. It can bring clarity to an important decision. And more than that, it can reconnect you with yourself. Because in the midst of the noise, the rush, the 1,000 tasks, breathing is the reminder that you are alive, here now, and that in itself is sacred. Awakening begins with body awareness. Feeling the air moving in and out of your lungs is more than physiology, it's presence, and when you are present, the mind begins to slow down. Thoughts lose strength, emotions settle, everything reorganizes. It is no wonder that in Eastern traditions, the breath of life is treated with reverence. Prana in Hinduism, Qi in Chinese medicine. The incoming air carries vital energy, and you can choose whether you are just surviving or awakening with every breath. There is no true awakening without passing through the body, and the body starts with breathing. So when everything seems out of place, breathe. When you're too happy, breathe. When you're too sad, breathe. Breathing teaches you balance. Neither repress nor explode. Just feel, flow, and return to center. The world will keep trying to pull you out of yourself, but your return point is always there, right under your nose. What really awakens is not a grand miracle. It's the habit of coming back to yourself, to remember that you have a choice, that your peace does not depend on what happens, but on how you breathe through what happens. Breathing is your invisible mantra. It's the thread that sews you inside, and when used with intention, it becomes the most powerful compass on your inner journey. Principle 8. The Immortal Moment. Find the eternal in the now, and stop fearing death. Death is the great shadow that accompanies every step of life. No matter how much we try to avoid it, it is always there, like a silent reminder that everything ends. But in Buddhism, death is not a definitive end. It's just a transition, one moment, and most importantly, it is a mirror that reflects life. When you face death head-on, you begin to truly live. The moment without death is not about escaping death, but rather about finding something within yourself that never dies, something that remains, even when everything else falls apart. This something is pure consciousness, the presence that observes, feels, learns, but does not dissolve with the body. You can call it soul, essence, spirit. The name matters less than the experience. Have you ever noticed how there are moments that seem suspended in time? A real hug, a sunset that silences you, a look that passes through you. These are moments without death, because in them you are so whole in the now that there is no past or future, just presence, just life, and that's when you touch the eternal, even if for a second. I remember a man who survived a serious car accident. While waiting for the ambulance, he thought he was dying, but instead of despair, he felt a deep peace. In that instant, he said, I realized I wasn't my name, my job, my body. I was just consciousness. He didn't die, but something inside him changed forever. He began to live with more purpose, stopped postponing dreams. He stopped saving words. Contact with finitude freed him, because death, when understood, does not paralyze, it awakens. In practice, living the moment without death means leaving autopilot. It's realizing that each day can be your last, not as a burden, but as an invitation to presence. It's calling the ones you love now, not later. It's saying I love you even when scared. It's making decisions that bring you closer to who you really are. It's not about living in a hurry. It's about living truthfully, because the truth, when assumed, takes away the power of fear. And those who no longer fear the end begin to savor the middle. Many people live as if it were eternal, leaving what really matters for later. But spiritual awakening happens when you understand that everything is temporary, except how you live each moment. Eternity is not in time. It's in the intensity of your presence. A minute lived consciously is worth more than years lived automatically. Death is coming, yes, but you don't have to wait for it to start living deeply. The fear of death is the fear of not having lived long enough, of not being who you wanted to be, of not having loved as I could have. But when you surrender completely to the now, something magical happens. Time dissolves. And for a few seconds, you realize that there is something in you that was never born, and therefore can never die. This is the moment of no death, and it is always available if you stop, breathe, and simply exist. Principle 9. The Noble Inner Warrior. Access fierce compassion to defeat ego. There is a strength inside you that doesn't scream, doesn't impose, doesn't dominate, but never bows. She doesn't look for a fight, but she doesn't run away from it either. This force is the noble inner warrior. In Buddhism, he does not fight against others, but against illusions. He does not wield a sword, but carries presence, courage, and compassion as weapons. Your biggest battle, the ego, that voice that says, you have to win at any cost. You need to prove something. You are better or worse than others. The noble warrior looks this voice in the eyes and does not obey. This warrior is neither cold nor distant. On the contrary, he acts with heart. But it is a firm heart, which knows what is right even when it hurts. He chooses what is fair, not what is easy. He has the humility to learn and the strength to say no when necessary. I remember a young woman who grew up hearing that she needed to please everyone. When she began her spiritual journey, she thought being compassionate was being passive. But one day, when she said no, firmly and lovingly, she realized she was acting like a warrior, not by attacking, but by honoring yourself. The inner warrior is not driven by anger, but by clarity. He knows that fighting the world is useless if you haven't overcome internal conflicts. He watches his impulses before acting. When someone hurts him, he feels it, but he chooses how to respond. He does not react with revenge, but with wisdom. It's like bamboo that bends in the wind but doesn't break. Be firm without being harsh. Be sensitive without being weak. This is the art of the spiritual warrior. In practice, this means speaking the truth with respect. It means defending limits without aggression. It means recognizing your own shadow without running away from it. The ego wants to keep up appearances. The warrior wants to live authentically. Sometimes this requires confronting your own fear, leaving your comfort zone, facing difficult conversations. But every such act strengthens your spiritual spine. You will feel, little by little, that you can trust yourself, that you no longer need to pretend, that it is possible to live with integrity, even in a world that often rewards illusion. And this warrior does not walk alone. He knows when to ask for help. You know that vulnerability is also courage. He doesn't need to win every day. You just need to continue choosing the path of truth, conscience, and heart. What makes this warrior noble is not how much he achieves on the outside, but how much he stays true to himself on the inside. He doesn't want to destroy the enemy. He wants to transform him, because you know that often the enemy is just a wounded party asking to be heard. We all have that warrior inside of us. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe it was stifled by fear, shame, or doubt. But he is there, and you can call it, not to fight the world, but to keep your soul standing. In difficult times, in difficult choices, in difficult pains, remember him. Take a deep breath, straighten your body, And ask, what would my warrior do now? The answer may not be easy, but it will almost always be true. Principle 10. The silence that speaks. Decode the language beyond thought. Not all silence is empty. Sometimes he is saying more than any words. There is a type of silence that is not the absence of sound, but total presence. It's when the mind stops racing, and for a moment, everything makes sense, even if you don't know how to explain it. Buddhism teaches us that true knowledge is not in books, nor in the most beautiful speeches, but in that silent space between one thought and another. The silence that speaks doesn't need to prove anything. It just exists, and therefore it reveals what is most essential. This silence is neither embarrassed nor uncomfortable. It is welcoming, like the lap of someone who understands you without having to ask. I remember a master who, when asked how to achieve peace, just closed his eyes and remained silent for a few minutes. Then he said, "If I had spoken, you would have understood with your mind, but in the silence, you can feel with your being." This kind of silence doesn't have to be dramatic. It can happen in the middle of a coffee on a walk at sunset, when you stop trying to understand and just feel. In practice, cultivating this silence is a daily choice. It's turning off the music sometimes, going without speaking for a while, not out of sadness but out of reverence. It's putting your cell phone aside and listening to the wind, your heart beating, your breath coming and going. It's not filling all the spaces with words, advice, or explanations. Sometimes the most healing thing you can offer someone is your silent presence, because in this space, the other person can hear themselves too. You can breathe. Could it be? Without having to perform, many of the answers you are looking for are already there, but they are buried under layers of noise, other people's opinions, expectations, concerns. All of this drowns out your own voice. Silence, when welcomed, begins to peel away those layers. And then, without fanfare, intuition awakens. You begin to notice subtleties, a yes that comes from the body, a no that echoes in the chest. It's not something you think about. It's something that is known. And this knowledge comes from silence, not from logic. Of course, not all silence is kind. Sometimes it brings to the surface what has been buried. It can hurt, bother, scare. But that's where it becomes valuable. Silence reveals what words hide, and only what is revealed can be healed. Those who learn to listen to silence discover that it does not judge, does not compare, does not demand. It just shows. And it is in this transparency that consciousness matures. Each moment of true silence is like cleaning a mirror and finally seeing what was always there. It is said that in a monastery in the mountains of Kyoto, there was a monk who never spoke. His name was Haku. For years, he cultivated silence as a sacred practice. A restless young novice approached him and asked, "Master, why don't you ever speak?" Haku just smiled and pointed to a bronze bell in the center of the temple. Without saying anything, he rang the bell once. The sound echoed through the rocks, through the trees, through the young man's chest. Haku then drew a circle on the floor and sat back down. The novice cried without knowing exactly why. At that moment, he understood that there are truths that only silence can touch, and there are answers that, when spoken, lose the strength they have when they simply resonate. Principle 11. The Lotus Rebirth Ritual. How to get out of suffering and reach a higher consciousness. The lotus flower is born from the mud. This image, as poetic as it is brutal, is one of the most powerful metaphors in Buddhist wisdom. Mud represents pain, confusion, trauma, error, but the flower is consciousness. The lotus does not reject mud. It needs it. It grows from it. So is the human being. Pain is not an obstacle to enlightenment. It is the fertile ground where it germinates. The Lotus Rebirth Ritual is about transforming everything that seemed like an end into a beginning. It's about letting what no longer serves die and emerging whole, not despite the pain, but with it. This rebirth is not immediate. It requires time, presence, patience. First comes the collapse, that point when everything seems lost. Then, silence, the wet earth, the womb of the dark. This is where the new seed begins to form. I remember a woman who, after years in an abusive relationship, left carrying only her own body and a notebook. She wrote every day, "I'm still here. I can still flourish." Months later, she returned to studying, founded a social project and began helping other women. She didn't ignore the mud. She blossomed into it. The Lotus Ritual begins with an internal act, acceptance. It is not resignation nor passivity. It's the courage to look at yourself without filters, to recognize pain without defining yourself by it. In Buddhism, this is called seeing with the eyes of the dharma, seeing reality as it is, not as we would like it to be. When we accept, something in us relaxes, the infighting subsides, and in that space, light enters. From there, the process becomes alchemical. Emotions turn into wisdom, scars become maps, the soul finds a new path. On a practical level, this ritual can be lived in silence, in prayer, in writing, or even in tears. The important thing is not the format, but the intention. You can create your moment of rebirth, a conscious bath, a letter to the past, a symbolic haircut, a deep breath before letting something go. There are no rules. Rebirth is intimate, sacred, and if you've heard this far, it's because you're already going through it. You may not realize it yet, but your lotus is already growing, even if you still only see the mud. The Buddha said, just as the lotus flower emerges immaculate from the mud, the awakened being emerges from human suffering, and also, suffering is the path to purification of the being. These are not phrases to console. They are reminders that pain plays a role, that chaos can be a portal. The important thing is not to stop. Continue even when there is no strength, even when everything seems meaningless. The path itself reveals itself to those who walk sincerely. An old Zen tale tells that a disciple asked the master, "Master, how can I be reborn if everything in me is broken?" The master in silence took him to a garden. He pointed to a lotus that sprouted from a dirty puddle full of dead leaves. "See," he said, "it didn't wait for the water to be clear to grow." The disciple cried. For the first time, he understood that he didn't need to be perfect to flourish. I just needed to say yes to nature itself. And so, like the lotus, he began to rise. For millennia, this knowledge was restricted to a few, not because it was secret, but because most were not ready to look beyond the veil. Each of the 11 principles you discovered today is a key. It's a key that tears the veil of illusion, of pain, of the ego, and reveals something that has always been there. You are awakened. Sign up now and activate the bell, because each new veil removed is one less step towards suffering and one more step towards freedom. As the ancient masters said, the moment is now, the seeker is you, the path is here.